This is the death mask of the pharaoh Tutankhamun. It's a stunning feat of craftsmanship and artistry. 24 pounds of solid gold, covered with precious gemstones and minerals. Behind it was the face of a boy, dead at just 19 years old. Hi, I'm Josh Bernstein. I've come here to Egypt to learn about some recent discoveries which may shed light on the mysterious death of the golden boy, King Tut. My journey begins in Luxor, some 450 miles south of the Egyptian capital, Cairo. More than 3,000 years ago, before his life was cut short, the pharaoh Tutankhamun ruled from this ancient city, on the banks of the River Nile. Archaeologists call it Thebes, its Greek name. But to the boy king Tutankhamun, the city here was called Waset. It was his home. During the time of the pharaohs, Egyptians believed that the Nile symbolized the journey of their lives. The east, where the sun rose, represented birth, and the west, where the sun set, represented death. By crossing the Nile, I'm following the journey of Tutankhamun as his life came to an abrupt end and his body traveled west to the Valley of the Kings. The trail of clues into the mysterious death of Tut begins here. And if anyone can help me uncover the real truth,
Dr. Zahi.
Hi, Josh.
it's my good friend, Dr. Zahi Hawass.
Yes. Boy King this time.
Golden Boy, yes.
Yeah. So here, Valley of the Kings.
Yes.
Why here?
Because this place is silent, it's safe, it can hide the tomb, and it has the pyramid shape. And they decided this could be the burial place for all the kings of the New Kingdom, and King Tut, one of them.
Should we go see his tomb?
Let's go.
Okay.
By the time of Tutankhamun, Egyptian pharaohs had stopped building pyramid tombs. Instead, beneath a mountain with a natural pyramid shape, they began tunneling elaborate burial chambers into bedrock. In 1917, a British archaeologist named Howard Carter came to this valley. He was intrigued by vague evidence of an undiscovered tomb. Carter dug for 4 seasons before facing an ultimatum. His excavation sponsor, a wealthy English aristocrat named Lord Carnarvon, agreed to fund the dig for only 1 more year. Amazingly, in that year, the richest discovery in the history of archaeology was made.
Can we enter?
Of course.
Okay. I brought some flashlights for us.
Good.
On November 26, 1922, Carter and Carnarvon together descended these very steps for the first time.
And these were the steps that Carter led, and so this hasn't changed at all.
At the bottom, Carter chipped a small hole in the tomb entrance and gazed upon an unimaginable collection of riches.
And when he looked inside, and Lord Carnarvon asked him, what do you see?
And he said,
Wonderful things, wonderful things.
On the other side of the wall were more than 5,000 artifacts. They were among the most spectacular ancient treasures the world had ever seen, all packed tightly into a few small rooms. Today, the first room across from the entrance is called the Annex. Now empty, it's off-limits to tourists.
I never entered in the treasury or the annex in a camera before. This is the first time.
just for you.
But I have to tell you that you can imagine that this was also stored with this gold artifacts and was in layers because they dug that deeply. Then it can take most of the artifacts.
Adjacent to the burial chamber is another small room that still contains relics from the time of the pharaohs.
This is the treasury.
This is actual from the tomb here.
Yeah, well, things was left over. They even look at hieroglyphic.
Yeah. All the gold is gone.
Then you can
We have the...
touching what.
That's pretty cool. Touching the past. So, Doctor, what would this place have looked like?
This was, you know,
Filled, right?
the
Filled with
treasury filled of chapels and gold and statues, and it was the most precious place. I think there is no tomb on
The
earth.
treasury and the annex were filled with precious treasures, all arranged around the burial chamber of a golden king, Tutankhamun.
It was the most valuable archaeological treasure ever found.
Yes.
Look, Josh. Josh, look.
Look at the face.
Still intact as it was discovered is the golden sarcophagus of a king,
Lips, the cobra.
whose identity and life story immediately began to trouble
The
archaeologists.
cobra will bite him. The scenes in the
His elegant likeness was not that of a wizened old ruler, but a picture of youth. And his treasures were crowded into a tomb that was tiny for an Egyptian pharaoh. Normally, the tombs of these kings were built while they ruled, and they were huge, up to 100 rooms. But Tut's tomb only had 4 rooms, indicating work here had barely begun. All evidence pointed to a death that took ancient Egypt by surprise.
because he died suddenly.
So this was as much as they could create in the time they had.
When King Tut died, then they had to do things quickly.
Simple paintings, rather than ornate carvings, also suggest that the burial chamber was prepared in a rush.
If you look at this scene, it shows King Tut is buried in his chapel. Look here. And now the people in the cemetery are taking his mummy in the funeral procession to the tomb. And again, if you look at this,
Images surrounding Tut's body show scenes of his passage to eternity. According to Egyptian belief, such images were required for the tombs of the pharaohs. But they were usually far more elaborate than these. Archaeologists had discovered a young king, dead without explanation, and a rushed preparation for burial. But things got really bizarre when the excavation financier, Lord Carnarvon, died, just a few months after the tomb was opened. A curse on the tomb of Tutankhamun was declared, and the international press had a field day. More prominent deaths in Egypt and across the globe were blamed on King Tut. Fascination with the tomb spread worldwide, and the curse of the mummy was born.
You think that there may be some weird juju?
you know, still with all these discoveries, with all what's happened in the time of the discovery of the tomb, with what's happened to me, there is a mystery about this king. Magic and mystery.
In modern times, belief in the curse has faded. But the mystery of the boy king's death has grown. My search for clues must continue outside the walls of the tomb. I'm headed to the Egyptian Museum to see what I can learn from the new home of the treasures of Tutankhamun.
One of my favorite museums.
The body of King Tut wasn't just buried in the one sarcophagus I saw in the tomb. There were 3, one inside the other, inside the other. And inside all of these, pressed against the very skin of the boy king himself, was this dazzling golden mask. To help me continue my search with an inside look at the treasures that adorn the dead king is Museum Director Dr. Wafa El-Sadiq.
What's so special? I mean, I see it and it's beautiful, but what's so
Yes.
special to them about gold?
Well, gold was the flesh of the gods, so he became a god when he died. You know, this was not the end. This was the beginning of eternal life, okay?
Where to begin?
To the ancient Egyptians, Tutankhamun was becoming a god himself. His body was draped with treasures meant to symbolize this transformation and protect him in the life to come.
More jewelry.
Yes, these were found covering the mummy.
The wrappings of the mummy contained hundreds of symbolic jewels, like the scarab beetle, the cobra, and the vulture.
What's over there?
In addition to jewels, Dr. Wafa shows me that clues from the tomb, like gloves and slippers, in both child sizes and adult, led archaeologists to estimate that Tutankhamun was crowned sometime around the age of just 10 years old. As he ruled, the child king grew into a young adult who governed the most advanced civilization on Earth from this very throne.
This is the famous throne of Tutankhamun, and we see him sitting on another throne, and his wife is perfuming him.
Intimate details of the boy's life emerged from the contents of the tomb, like his marriage to either a sister or half-sister, and that neither of their two children survived after birth. The image we have of King Tut's life has grown richer and richer. But still, without solid evidence of the cause of his death, my quest must expand. From the artifacts of his life to the records describing the times in which he lived. In a crowded corner of the museum, Dr. Wafa shows me a document from the time of King Tut.
I think this is the most important documentary stele we have from that time, because it is describing the situation exactly as it was.
This is a very, it's a reality check on, I've got temples that haven't been cleaned, I've got gods that haven't been worshipped, I've got priests who've been unemployed, right? Isn't that kind of what this is addressing?
Yes, about the temples.
The restoration stele doesn't mention the pharaoh's death, but it describes a time of crisis during his reign. King Tut had big problems on his hands.
This is more important than gold and silver and precious
Really?
objects. Yes,
All the beautiful stuff we just saw, this is more important?
If I have a text like this, this is for me much more the gold.
Because
very
it's
important.
insightful.
It's history. It's history.
It seems I have a new trail of clues to follow. Perhaps I can solve this mystery by exploring the written records of ancient Egypt, left by scribes and pharaohs alike. Unlike some ancient cultures, the Egyptians were prolific writers, especially during the time of King Tut. Perhaps more clues into his mysterious death can be found in the records they left behind, written on papyrus or hammered into stone. My good friend, Dr. Salima Ikram, is an expert in Egyptian language and writing. She's agreed to give me a crash course on how the ancient Egyptians recorded the history of pharaohs like Tut.
Good to see you again.
Great to see you. You made it all right?
Yeah.
Where we're going?
In here.
Just on the outskirts of Cairo,
Not too shabby, huh?
Salima set up Egyptian Communication 101,
My office had a good view, but
a lesson which starts with papyrus.
Yep, this is it. Cypress papyrus.
This was always the only plant used.
Yeah, this was the only plant used until about, 1000 AD. First step, cut off a chunk. Ha!
Starting more than 2,000 years before King Tut, Egyptians cut these plants and soaked the slices in water.
You let them soak, and you let them soak for several, well, probably a couple of days.
Oh, so they get waterlogged and brown.
Uh-huh, and they're all sort of flexible. Next step,
Yes.
squeeze out
Ring it.
the juice.
This really does feel like a cooking show.
I'm just going to put this in.
And today we're going to make papyrus.
Luckily, the pharaoh's not going to have our head if we don't do a good job.
Okay.
After cutting and soaking,
Now,
soft papyrus strips were flattened, pounded, and left to dry into sheets.
Oh, Pete, take a peek.
Take a peek.
Look at that. And can you show me how you actually write on papyrus? Do we have
Certainly.
that? Yeah.
This is ochre.
Using naturally occurring colors, like red ochre and black charcoal, Egyptians painted on papyrus, creating one of the first written languages in history.
So hieroglyphs started as hieroglyphs? What's the evolution of
Well,
writing?
probably we have sort of pictures, and then it moves on to more the language of hieroglyphs with the sounds and all being much more organized. So, do you know any?
Boy.
Simple one. Ankh sign?
Ox?
Ankh.
Oh, Ankh. Oh, yeah, I know the Ankh.
Okay. This
All
is
right.
what a scribe would be doing. There you go.
So we've got the Ankh of Tutankhamun.
And you know what that means, right?
Ankh is life. Mm-hmm. Tutankhamun means living being of Amun.
Yeah.
Really?
Living manifestation of Amun.
Ah,
Well
okay.
done.
But this brush is too thick.
Messages from Tutankhamun would be
This is
identified by his cartouche. This royal name tag marked official monuments and property of the king, carved for eternity into stone.
Very fun. Okay, but this, let's see what you have over here. This is only half of
This is
how they recorded things.
yeah, because I mean the most important things were of course monumental inscriptions on temple walls,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where you get your stone. But this is much more beautiful, and it takes far more time to do.
So reading this is the Amun. This is the Tut, Ankh, and then we have some new stuff down here.
Yeah, this is actually his full formal name. We just call him Tutankhamun, but his real name is Heka Unu Shemal.
So if someone wanted to send a message to somebody,
You use
you'd
papyrus.
use papyrus, sort of like the email,
Yeah.
text messages. But
Okay.
if you wanted a formal document, or if a king were trying to record something, it was done in stone.
Yeah, stone was used for formal documentation. So on temples, if a king had fought a special battle, he wanted it recorded for posterity, that would be in stone. And if he celebrated a special festival, that would be done in stone. Because if it was in stone, it would be lasting forever. So if he did it once, it's sort of there for eternity.
As writing evolved from pictures to language, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt left messages across the country. I've been here enough to know the place that pharaohs really loved to leave their marks was far to the south of Cairo, back in the ancient temples of Luxor.
Karnak Temple is the largest religious complex in the world, and there's no shortage of the pharaohs of Egypt leaving their marks here. So that makes this the perfect place to look for clues about the life and death of Tutankhamun.
I've come on a search for the cartouche of King Tut. Here to help me look is Professor Donald Redford.
Hey, Josh.
Hi, Josh.
Great to finally meet you.
Nice to meet you, too.
So you picked this spot, why?
Yes, to introduce Tutankhamun to you, who is over here.
A statue of Tutankhamun, though damaged, still remains. Evidence that the boy king left his mark here at Karnak is clear. But it appears Tut's name has been erased.
Can we find cartouches of Tut?
No,
No.
we cannot. He is conspicuous by his absence, actually, and wherever he is found, his cartouche has been erased.
Really?
Yes,
Gone.
gone. He's been anathematized. He's been damned. His memory has been damned because he was tainted with the Amarna heresy.
Ah, okay, this story I know. The Amarna Revolution,
Right.
worshipping the Aten.
In 2004, I visited the ruins of a city called Amarna.
Oh, wow.
Deep inside a tomb, I saw evidence of a religious revolution that I'm now learning had an impact on Tutankhamun. It all revolved around this image, a god called the Aten, or sun disk. Tutankhamun's predecessor, the pharaoh Akhenaten, created it. He forced Egyptians to worship this one god and closed the temples of all the others. Many people resisted, and the country fell into crisis. Donald Redford tells me the boy king tried to reverse this revolution, and some think he was murdered because of it.
Has he overthrown Akhenaten's beliefs?
In his third year, probably advised by his mentors, he immediately began a program of reopening the older temples, the temples of the gods.
So let me understand this, that when King Tut took over, Egypt was in disarray?
Yes, very much.
Financially a mess?
Yes, it was, yeah.
And in order to restore things to some semblance of order, he said, okay, that whole Amarna thing,
Yes.
Aten sun disk, gone.
Yes, to put the whole system back to where it was before Akhenaten had closed the temples.
Sure. That's
pretty mature for a boy king, isn't it?
Yes, I'm sure that he had mentors who were behind the scenes.
Just waiting to overthrow what Akhenaten.
Yes, and urging him on.
Working closely with his advisors, Tutankhamun reversed the situation he inherited. Some historians interpreted this as a sign of political strength, but others think Tut got in the way of someone else's plan. So he may have been a little coerced into this.
Yes.
He's a young king. He's
think-
got to make the people happy. He's got to make his advisors happy.
That's right. I think he's malleable too. I mean, he's just a kid.
As archaeologists uncovered more about the Amarna period and Tutankhamun's role in ending it, suspicions of murder began to circulate, with members of Tut's court as chief suspects. First was Horemheb. He was Tutankhamun's military advisor, and eventually a pharaoh too. He's also the one who chipped Tut's cartouche off the walls of Egypt. The next suspect was Aya, chief political advisor to the boy king. He had worked his way up through the ranks of the Amarna government. And he was the man who became pharaoh when Tut died. Both men would have benefited from Tut's early death, or perhaps his assassination. Was Tut murdered, or was his death an accident? It's time to go back to the one man in Egypt who may really know, Dr. Zahi Hawass.
About King Tut sits in this chair,
Okay.
and I'm sitting here, and I will tell you
Yes.
everything about this king.
Okay.
You know, the mummy has been x-rayed twice and stated that King Tut was murdered.
Yeah, I've been exploring that idea.
You do?
Political, maybe, Horemheb, people.
Yes.
It turns out the skull of King Tut was x-rayed twice, and twice a hole was shown at the base of the skull. This hole was the proof archaeologists had been searching for. The theory of death by attack. A blow to the back of the head went mainstream. But for Zahi, the investigation continued.
You know, I have good moments in my life in archaeology. Great moments that I never forget. One of them, or the best, was facing King Tut face to face.
You saw him.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
Looking at his face.
In 2005, Zahi and an international team descended beneath the Valley of the Kings and removed King Tut from his tomb to examine him with a CT scan machine. The machine took almost 2,000 images of the body, creating a 3D model that gave Zahi the best picture of the boy king ever taken, and shattered those rumors of murder.
Geologists found out from examining this that there is no blow on the back of the head.
No, nothing. There's a
That hole,
Yeah.
it was not because he was murdered. That hole came because of the mummification process that was done in Dynasty 18. They open a hole like that to put the liquid inside.
It wasn't like someone hit him with a stick.
No. The second thing, that there is no foul play.
Nothing.
Nothing.
You sure?
I'm sure.
But after examining evidence from the CT scan, Zahi uncovered an intriguing new insight into the death of Tutankhamun. For more than 3,000 years, the mummified body hid a secret: a broken left leg. It was an injury that might have caused Tut's death.
The idea of a murder, it's exciting, it's a myth, it's a mystery. But I am so happy when I went and I did all of this, and I was a radiologist. When they discovered this, I did not, from the beginning, I said to myself, I hope that this beautiful, young, golden boy was not really murdered.
So the idea is that he wasn't necessarily killed for political reasons or murdered, but he died for medical reasons.
Yes, this is really what I believe now. This is something like an accident happened to him.
Seeing the CT scan, archaeologists began to wonder, could an Egyptian king really have died from a broken leg? For this, I'm switching gears from murder to medicine. In Alexandria, Egypt, is a medical doctor who knows how King Tut would have been treated more than 3,000 years ago. His name is Dr. Sameh Arab.
I got the right office. Okay, Josh, nice to meet you. So I brought this for you. I'd imagine it's pretty exciting to look at the bones of a pharaoh.
Oh, yes, it's very exciting.
Yeah? That's a major injury.
Yes, it's a major injury.
Major.
It's a major trauma, yes.
Because from what I understand, to break a femur, it's not easy, right?
No, it's not easy. This is one of the tough bones in the body, and it's covered by a bulk of muscles, so it's not easy to be broken.
Would this be a life-threatening injury?
Well, usually broken bones wouldn't threaten life, but there are two factors that you would expect. With a major trauma like this, I would expect bleeding, much bleeding. And the other point is the infection. How long did it take him to get medical attention? So it has to be a major trauma, either blowing something against him, hitting him with something hard, or falling from a height like a horse or something like that.
Doctor, is there any way that, because I know this is an area of interest for you, is there a way that we could turn back the clock and you could show me ancient Egyptian medicine?
Yes, we can do that. Let's go to the examination room and I'll show you.
Yeah? Okay. I'll play King Tut.
You play King Tut.
Okay. And you'll be the royal physician?
There's Sunu, the royal physician.
Okay.
King Tut's doctors were devoted students of the natural world.
This way.
In it, they found treatments and medicines that could have helped King Tut stay alive.
I don't feel so good. I feel so good.
And then first of all, we have to stop the bleeding.
Okay.
Raw meat was used to stop bleeding.
It's a piece of meat. We just put it here and compress.
It's cold.
The bark of the willow tree was used as a pain reliever.
Salicin. This I know, which is the primary ingredient in aspirin.
But for Tut, with an open wound and a severely broken left leg, the main threat to his life was likely infection.
Can I use some items to make this look like a wound? Just give me 2 seconds.
When we teach wilderness medicine in my outdoor survival school, BOSS, we always help students visualize the kinds of injuries they'd really see by drawing them in place.
It's a little bit worse than just pretend.
So we're going to apply some honey, something we call hygroscopic. It imbibes water, pulls the water out. So this would kill any organism.
This is just regular honey?
Yes, just honey. Yeah, you can taste it.
Honey?
Yeah.
Actually, I know that honey is sterile, right?
Is sterile,
Honey
yes.
is sterile. It doesn't.
Yes.
It does
No,
not.
no.
You
No
can't have any
organism-
infection.
No organism at all can live in honey. And then
If
the
no
other-
organism can grow in honey, then no infection can grow there either.
Really? We had penicillin back then?
Honey was an antibiotic, just like moldy bread.
Don't worry, this is an antibiotic.
Okay. Wait. I just want to appreciate what you're putting on my leg. Before you put it on my leg. You have moldy bread, just pita, right? Arabic bread, AKA penicillin, and honey, and no microbes would get in.
No microbes, yes.
No microbes. Okay.
Infection was a huge concern for the ancient Egyptians, and they discovered lots of ways to prevent it.
And garlic. If you squeeze it and you get the juice out of it, it was discovered that each of these has a special antibiotic-like substance.
Good. Give me the big piece. Give me half of that. This is how you make onion juice. I'm gonna have like the weirdest smelling knee in history. Think I'll live?
Oh yes, you will.
Okay. Between their meat and their mold, their willow bark, their honey, those ancient Egyptians really knew their medicine. And yet, the king died. Which makes you wonder, because to me, the world of the pharaoh is one of protection. He had aides, he had courtiers, he had people who basically were there to do his bidding. And yet we know that this was a massive injury. It's not easy to break your femur and then to die from it. So maybe the king wasn't so protected after all. Makes you wonder what he did to get himself in that position.
Once again, museum director Dr. Wafa El Sadiq has agreed to show me around. But this time,
Yeah.
she's teaching me about King Tut, the warrior.
And what's this scene on here?
Well, this is showing Tutankhamun in his chariot with his beautiful horses.
This famous chest shows Tutankhamun hunting and at war, all from the back of a chariot. As the goods from the tomb were sorted and studied further, archaeologists began to see this young pharaoh was not just a king, but a military leader in training.
So these are actually
These-
Tut's bows.
Yes, these are the bows.
He had a lot of them.
Yes, and we have lots of arrows too.
And these are the bowstrings, and those look like slings. So he was quite an enthusiastic archer.
King Tut's tomb contained a wealth of weapons, more than 50 bows
Lots of arrows, too.
Yes,
and 400 arrows. But the prize weapon from the tomb was the chariot. King Tut was buried with 6 of these. This one was fully functional and covered with gold.
have all the elements of the chariot in this one.
So we can assume
This one was
that
used.
he actually stood on this
Yes.
and had these 2 horses pull him
Yes,
as he was either performing a ceremony or firing his bow or both.
exactly. Yes.
Ah.
While still just a child, Tutankhamun would have been exposed to the arts of war. His tomb was filled with the weapons of ancient Egypt, and with evidence that he was learning to use them.
As pharaoh, Tutankhamun was the commander of the Egyptian army. Perhaps it was his military training or his experiences on the battlefield that brought his life to an early end.
In the very desert where King Tut would have had his training, I've come to meet military historian and weapons expert Mike Lodes. He's agreed to show me just what was expected of the boy king.
So I've explored the museum and the artifacts found in Tut's tomb. But what I really want to understand is what it was like to use them. What was a pharaoh expected to know as far as these weapons go?
I mean, the pharaoh had to prove himself in war and in hunting. These were high-status activities, and he had to be the pharaoh by right, that he had prowess. So he has to be good, he has to have skill.
So was he trained from childhood?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Trained from at least 7 onwards.
The weapons in Tut's tomb were not props. They weren't there for show. King Tut might have been injured training to be a warrior. So Mike is taking me through the arsenal, starting with the simplest first.
Well, I think one of the most surprising things about Tut's treasure, Tut's treasure, it's famous. It's the byword for treasure in the world. And he has sticks in there, just simple sticks. And these were weapons. They were weapons in war. They were thrown in war, and they can be used as clubs. But mainly, they were a hunting weapon.
Most likely, he would have been trained in hitting small game with this.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't care how grown up you are or how much of a prince you are, throwing a stick and trying to hit something's fun.
Let's have fun.
Let's have fun, okay?
Yeah. Oh. Ah.
It's unlikely Tutankhamun could have hurt himself learning to throw a stick. But with practice, he would have grown strong and accurate.
Bravo, good shot.
Tut's tomb held a range of weapons from the period, and the young king would have practiced with all of them.
Again, to my surprise, in this royal tomb is the sling. It's the really basic, simple sling. This is the weapon of the shepherd boy. It's a really humble weapon, but it's actually quite sophisticated in the way it's made.
The sling was an effective ancient weapon. But true military sophistication for the Egyptian pharaoh came with the bow and the arrow.
Mike, I know that during the time of the pharaohs, no weapon was more deadly than this one.
Absolutely. And it's also the high-status weapon.
Okay.
Now, this, as you might recognize, is similar to the weapons you've seen in the museum.
It looks a lot like it.
But what you'll have seen in the museum is a completely different shape, which is this. It's a flattened W. And people used to think these were not the same weapons, that they were 2 different types of bow.
Sure.
But it's when you string it, it's a little bit of archery magic. It actually changes shape. It metamorphosizes into this angular bow. And then again, when you draw it, it comes up into a beautiful crescent arc. It's an extraordinary piece of equipment.
As Tutankhamun grew, the danger in his training increased. He would have gone from learning to hunting to driving a chariot. The goal eventually would have been to combine all these skills in the new high-risk art of chariot warfare.
It doesn't get fancier.
This is gorgeous.
This, from people who were using wooden bows,
Yeah.
throwing sticks and slings.
Yeah.
150 years before Tut, they've got this. They're into a new league. It's a terror weapon. What you get is you get somebody driving the chariot, and the high status person, the pharaoh,
Oh, thank you. Firing.
shooting.
Can we give it a shot?
Yeah, keep your knees bent and absorb the bounce.
Okay.
You're gonna have to
It's always a new thing.
pick your moment
Yeah.
when to lose, because it's quite.
Okay.
So
We'll just go for it. I see you've got a target set up down there. That's what I'm going to be shooting.
do it.
Okay. All right.
I've ridden as an archer on a chariot before. There are 1,000 ways to hurt yourself. Horses can get spooked. You can hit a rock, or you could just slip. But with a little practice, you can get off a good shot too. But according to Mike Loades, for King Tut, an even riskier trick was required.
You think that was difficult? What the pharaoh did, which nobody else did. So he had a regiment of chariot warriors, all with a driver, working and shooting. But to put him above that, to give him this godlike status, the pharaoh would gallop solo, on his own, and shoot the bow. Great level of difficulty and a great level of danger.
Because I've seen these drawings of Tutankhamun, but I always thought that was more of like political grandstanding, where that was a picture in artwork, but not necessarily real life.
You're quite right. And we can't really know how much is spin and how much is truth. And it's certainly been thought that this feat of tying the reins around your waist is probably not doable. But that's our little challenge, isn't it?
Could a person control a chariot without using his hands? Let's find out.
Yeah, yeah,
King Tut's horses would have been expertly trained.
yeah, come on, yeah. Run, horses, come on, run, horses. Run, horses, come on.
Mine are not.
Yeah, yeah,
But eventually, they get the hang of it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, 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 come on.
The chariot does seem possible to control, with the reins in my hand or around my waist.
Josh, how was that?
That was good.
I think you did really well. That was amazing.
But it was risky for me, and it would have been risky for Tut.
If he were dragged and then run over,
You only need one of those little jolts. And the horse is suddenly shy at something. Especially as you're coming up to draw. Or, look how thin this axle is. It's chariots being light, being as light as they can, but there's an inherent danger there. If that goes, then it drops very suddenly on one side. He's pitched over there, still tied on the reins, being dragged around. It's a bad place to be.
sure. So the idea of this not being just a weapon of war, but being the actual implement that hurt him, there's some validity. There's some truth to that.
Highly likely.
Tutankhamun, child, king, and warrior. From the relics of his life and the wonders of modern science, a new theory has arisen. Death by tragic accident. With one last visit, I'm going to run it by Dr. Zahi Hawass.
Learning a lot about touch.
Solving the mystery of
The
touch.
world of touch. Do you think chariot racing is, I mean, it's painful, I can tell you that. We know he's a warrior, we know he's the commander of the army, we know that he is
A hunter.
a hunter. He's 18, right? So he's 19. So he's probably got a lot of testosterone. You know, he's maybe doing things that I wouldn't do right now. But this could have propelled him to his death.
He could be hunting while riding his chariot, or could be in fighting, could be thrown out of it. But that fracture, it was sharp, and I think an infection or a shock maybe could be the cause of death.
At just 19 years old, Egypt's boy king Tutankhamun died suddenly, apparently from complications related to a devastating injury. A shattered femur just above the left knee. All the evidence points to an accident and to the chariot as probable cause.
This is actual.
From the depths of King Tut's tomb to the fields of his military training, I've seen rumors of murder fall silent. And a mystery is finally put to rest.